everyone, and welcome back to LycanhoodReads. My name's Michaela, and I'm coming at you today with a quick little review of a book called Not Good For Maidens by Tori Bovalino, I believe is her name. Not Good For Maidens recently came out this summer, and I had originally planned to save it for my spooky season sort of Halloween reading TBR. But it came out, and I just found that it came out on Scribd as well, so I just found that I couldn't resist going ahead and checking out the audiobook. Not Good For Maidens is a kind of YA straddling new adult retelling of The Goblin Market, which is a famous short story or poem, I guess. And of course it has this very gothic fairy tale, folk tale sort of vibe to it, and that transfers over into the writing of this novel as well. I want to start off by saying that I really enjoyed this book, particularly the audiobook. I felt like the narration was done really well, and I kind of blew through it rather quickly. So, Not Good For Maidens is about a group of young witches who have grown up with this great responsibility of protecting the city of York from the annual Goblin Market that comes and sort of basically kidnaps the young people of the city of York every year, entices them with what is essentially just this very dark, forbidden party that happens during the summer in this sort of other dimension beneath the city. Goblins lure away young people into the market and party and torment them and ultimately kill and eat them. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would anyone go to the Goblin Market? And I found myself asking that exact same question for most of the book. Even though I ended up really enjoying this book, I will say that that was kind of a sticking point that just kept coming back up over and over in my mind was, why would anyone go to the market? And the narrators and the author of the book tries to address this question and tries to explain this urge, this like irresistible urge that even the people that know about it, even these young witchlings who grew up knowing about the dangers of the market, they can still be drawn in. And so of course other people that are not as aware of the dangers of the market, like tourists or just other young people that didn't grow up knowing about it, of course they're going to be drawn into it as well. However, people that know the dangers knowingly make this terrible decision to go to this market. Like, it's sort of built up to be this very enchanting, magical thing that you just can't resist going to, like you just have to see it for yourself. But at the same time, several of the characters will just keep saying that they know there's only death and rot and torment waiting for them there, but they go anyway. So that was a bit of a like recurring frustration for me in the book. However, I ended up liking it, and let me tell you why. So the book has two POV characters, but I would say that one of them is more so a main character than the other. There is a present timeline and a flashback timeline 20 years earlier, roughly 20 years earlier. So two different perspectives, two different time periods. The one that I consider the main character, Lou, in present day, she identifies as Ace, so that's exciting, got an Ace character in there. She lives in Boston, and her favorite aunt, who is around her age, I was a little confused at this at the beginning of the book, but they are around the same age. She has an aunt that is of a similar age to her that she sort of grew up with, that she is very close to, despite the fact that one of them lives in Boston and one of them lives across the Atlantic in York. Anyway, they're very close. I don't have an explanation. They're very close, and this aunt goes missing into the Goblin Market. And so Lou and her mother and her other aunt all go back to York in order to rescue this girl that has gone missing into the market, that has been taken by the Goblin Market. And in the past timeline, we find out about her other aunt, an older aunt, who was taken into the market as a young girl, or who went into the market as a young girl, who was lured, and some terrible, awful, very bad things happened to her there that have been haunting their entire family pretty much since then for the last 20 years. So we go back and forth between these two timelines. Lou is in the present, she's Ace, and then May is in the past. She is Lou's aunt, she's bisexual, and there is a female-female romance in that past timeline with May that we get to enjoy. I really enjoyed it. So the entire plot of the book is essentially two rescue missions. There's like a rescue mission in the past, and then there's a rescue mission in the present with Lou. And we're following along as the past unfolds throughout the book as it helps us figure out what's going on in the present and with our mission in the present with Lou. I'd say the number one thing that I enjoyed about this book the most was the atmosphere. I mean, just look at this cover. This cover is incredible, and everything that you feel when you see this cover comes through in the atmosphere of the rest of the novel, in the prose, in the description of like the setting, the city, not only of the city of York, but also the Goblin Market itself. The atmosphere is extremely spooky, so if you're looking for something good for your spooky season TBR, I would definitely put this one on there, because I'd say that the author really nails this sort of enchanting, creeping, dreadful fairy tale aesthetic that it's going for. It really works. And the cover encompasses that really well as well. So that is an A plus for me, as far as like atmospheric, aesthetic feelings of creepy, enchanting Goblin Market stuff. I have to say that I enjoyed the past timeline more so than the present timeline. We keep jumping back and forth, not necessarily alternating chapters, but the timelines are split pretty evenly throughout the book, I would say. And I just found the past timeline more exciting. I liked May's perspective a lot more. I felt like I got to know her better as a character than I did Lou. Because Lou just lacked a little bit of personality for me. I'm not really sure why. I guess because she was so focused on the mysteries around her and like the mysteries of her family's past, and she was just finding out a lot of information. So Lou felt in the present timeline, she felt a little bit like a conduit for the reader, kind of just to be impressed upon. So there was a lot of exposition going on in Lou's POV, and I think that kept me from feeling like she was a fully realized person, because she was really just like a substitute for the reader a lot of the time. So I really found that I connected with May in the past timeline more. Her story is also a bit of a love story, which was interesting, and I really enjoyed this sort of forbidden love story that she gets sucked into with the goblin that lures her into the market. It is fantastic. Goblin Girl, love it. I just overall felt that May had a little bit more personality, particularly in the past timeline. She felt much more like a traditional heroine of a sort of fairy tale story that you would expect. I will say that the magic system in this book was a little loose. It's a soft magic system. There is a lot, so it's a coven of witches, a family of witches that we're dealing with in York, and we get most of that from Lou's perspective as like a newcomer who didn't originally know about any of the witchy magical stuff. And I just found that I didn't get a good sense of what kind of magic they were practicing, or like what their practice of magic really looked like. There was definitely a hefty amount of herbology. So like lots of herbs, lots of sort of healing potions and brews and things like that. But as far as actually working magic, we didn't really see a lot of that. It was mostly like superstition sort of stuff rather than like true magic of some kind. And I don't say that as a dig necessarily. If that's the magic system that they were going for, sort of a more traditional like healing, herbology, superstitious sort of thing, that's fine, and it fits in with the tone of the book well. I just don't want you to go in here expecting like hardcore magical witches, like objects flying around and stuff. That's definitely not what's here. The magic and the magic system is not the focus of this book. The Goblin Market is. The market itself definitely achieves this sort of spooky, forbidden vibe, this like sense of creeping dread. It is very literally a market, like a place where there are stalls and things for sale, mostly goblin fruit, which is this sort of overripe, just barely okay to eat fruit that has a psychedelic effect on humans. So the goblins use goblin fruit to not only entice humans, but also to sort of drug them. I get the sense that there's a lot of euphoria involved in it, and like losing time, possibly hallucinations as well. And it can have altering effects on the physical stuff of the people, like thorns sprouting from your skin, or vines or twigs growing from your scalp, that sort of stuff. I'm not sure if that's caused by the goblin fruit exactly, or if it's something else that the goblins do to humans within the market that I just didn't get a lot of details on. Other than goblin fruit, they also sell human flesh. So that's something about the market, is that goblins eat humans and they use the market to harvest humans from the real world in order to eat. And so there are stalls in the market that are selling like human body parts, like hands and torsos and jars of fat and things like that. And people still go to this market. I have no idea why. Multiple days in a row. Multiple days. So there's this thing with 3 days that you're allowed to be safe in the Goblin Market, or 3 nights rather, that you're allowed to be safe. And so I'm just saying, you go on the first day and you see market stalls full of human flesh, and you're like, oh yeah, let's come back tomorrow. I don't think so. That kept, like, again, it was a recurring annoyance. I'm just like, why would anyone go back here? But they do. Beyond the market itself, we're like with the stalls and buying things, it's just sort of like a big party. There's dancing, there's drinking wine, there seems to be great feasts. But beyond that, the market just seems to be this sort of forbidden, like, nightclub that you just have to go to just to say that you have. And even the fact that these witchlings who know and have seen all the horror of the market get drawn in, I found very interesting. Even though I keep complaining about the fact that they go even knowing that it's just a deadly place, there was this moment, particularly in May's perspective, where she's trying to articulate why she's making this poor decision. And she's saying, I know it's the wrong decision over and over and over and over again, but she just can't resist it. And I really liked this idea of feeling like she was making the wrong decision, but she was making that decision because it was her choice. Because May is a character that in that past timeline, she feels as though all of her choices have been taken away. Like, her entire path in life has just been laid out for her, decided for her, even before she was born, and that she doesn't get a choice. She doesn't get a choice about the path that her life is going to take, but she gets this choice of whether or not to go into the market. And even though it's a terrible choice, even though it's a dangerous choice, it's the only one she has, so she chooses to make it. And at that moment, I can't remember which chapter it is exactly. It's not a spoiler, but I really related to that, of just this making a bad choice because at least it's something you decide for yourself sort of thing. It was super interesting. The goblins themselves are a little one-dimensional, other than the main goblin girl that we meet, the main love interest. She has good personality. I liked her. I wish we had gotten to know her more, but the constraints of the plot just don't really allow for that. But other than that, the other goblins are all a little one-dimensional. They're sort of just the same copy of like this brutal trickster creature. They're all like a version of Loki. Just all of them, just a whole pack of Lokis pretty much. I would have liked to seen a bit more variation in the goblins, but this is a relatively short book, and we don't spend much time with goblins other than the main love interest that I mentioned before. So I can kind of understand, and it does have that bit of a fairy tale vibe to it, where yeah, they're one-dimensional because it's the creature in the dark, right? It's the trickster trying to lure you from your home sort of thing. So I can forgive the one-dimensional characters of the goblins. Understandable. If you're coming at this book thinking of it sort of like a horror novel, I mean, I think horror is a little bit too strong of a word. It's definitely creepy, and there's sort of this underlying creeping dread throughout the entire book, especially anytime you're actually in the Goblin Market. It's just dread, like you know something bad is going to happen. But most of the imagery is just sort of body horror stuff, so there's a lot of dead bodies, a lot of human flesh, thoughts about getting eaten. At one point, there's like a goblin in the corner gnawing on a human finger. So it's a lot of that sort of imagery, and that's a lot of the horror, or a lot of the scary elements. Other scary elements are just like being hurt, I guess. So like getting stabbed or beaten or things like that. It's not like a jump scare sort of horror, right? It's more like an atmospheric thing, and you just go into the market knowing that bad things are going to happen, and then the bad things happen, and you're like, yep, that's exactly what I expected to find here in the Goblin Market, where people die and get chopped up for food. So, yeah, the horror is pretty mild, mostly just dead bodies. There's lots of dead bodies and flesh. So if you're not cool with that, then trigger warning, I guess, for flesh. The romance in this book was really well done between May and the goblin girl that lures her into the Goblin Market. That's not a spoiler, that's something you find out really early in the books, kind of the whole premise of that past timeline. I thought it was really well done. I enjoyed everything about their sort of forbidden seduction and romance, and I really liked what they ended up doing with not only the romance but the characters as well, and just this sort of tragic but not in a gay way. Like, it's not tragic because they're gay, it's tragic because one of them is a flesh-eating goblin, right? And somehow this book and this author managed to make goblins sexy despite the fact that they eat human flesh. Like, who knew? It comes off way more of like this sort of forbidden vampire sexiness than it does like flesh-eating goblin sort of thing. I don't know, it worked for me, I liked it. So in conclusion, I guess I'll just say that this is a great spooky season read. It kind of straddles the line between YA and new adult. The characters are teenagers in their late teens, but they are dealing with adult themes. There is like adult language and that sort of stuff. Not really a lot of sexual content. And then of course the horror elements, a lot of just scary kind of violence and bodies, a lot of bodies in the Goblin Market. Overall, I'd say to read this book for the aesthetic, because it is a very creeping, enchanting sort of fairy tale lilt to it all, and it's definitely worth the read in spooky season. If I had to give it a 5-star rating, I would say 4 out of 5 stars, honestly, because I just enjoyed reading it. Do I have some complaints? Certainly. But I think the book really accomplished what it was going for, and I think it really played with this story, this fairy tale really well. It made it queer, it made it inclusive. It was just a blast to read, honestly, and I would recommend it to anyone any time of the year, but particularly for spooky season, it's great. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day.